What if you were a Wehrmacht soldier during World War II? Good day. Today let us ponder what it would have been like if you had become a Wehrmacht soldier during World War II. The average age of Wehrmacht soldiers at the start of the war was 25 years. This means you would have been born around 1914 to 1915. Since 1935, Nazi Germany had mandatory military conscription. The Wehrmacht drafted all citizens deemed fit for service. In the early years of the war, the conscription age ranged from 18 to 45. It is likely that you could have been drafted in 1937, but did not see demobilisation after 2 years of service because by September 1939, combat operations began in Poland. Let's examine the progression step by step. Upon joining the Wehrmacht, your first task would be to swear an oath of allegiance and readiness to die with a weapon in your hands. This oath was sworn not to the state or its people, but directly to Adolf Hitler, the head of state. Next, you would enter German military training. Nazi Germany had its own training system, marked by its high intensity and extremely harsh treatment of recruits. After the war, many soldiers who had been held in captivity claimed that the most terrible time they experienced in the Wehrmacht was not captivity or combat, but the training itself. The military training institutions adhered to the trench warfare principle. The more sweat, the less blood. Basic training lasted 16 weeks. Your day would begin with morning hygiene and roll call. Then came drills, uniform studies, exercises with cold and firearms, grenades, and field manoeuvres. You would train in any weather and at any time of day. Combat training was genuinely dangerous since exercises often involved live ammunition to create realistic battle conditions. On training grounds, German soldiers faced real dangers, which later minimised accidents caused by careless weapon handling within the Wehrmacht. By September 1st, 1939, you might have been stationed on Germany's eastern border with Poland. In this case, your chances of dying in combat would have been extremely low. At this time, the Wehrmacht had a total of 3,241,000 personnel. During the battles in Poland, Wehrmacht losses amounted to 10,200 soldiers, or 0.3% of its total strength. If your comrades were sent to the Western Front in France, you would have likely marched victoriously across Europe with Nazi forces, serving relatively comfortably compared to those sent to the East. However, fate sends you to the Eastern Front. Hitler and his generals had long and meticulously prepared for the invasion of the USSR. Like most soldiers in June 1941, you had no idea about the grinder awaiting you. No one believed Germany would attack. But at 3 a.m. on June 22nd, your division received orders to attack Soviet border guards. Initially, everything seemed familiar. You had already participated in the invasion of Poland, where the Wehrmacht crushed the Polish army's resistance in weeks. But upon entering Soviet territory, you encountered fierce resistance from Soviet border guards. However, your forces were larger, and you didn't even have time to engage in battle. The infantry executed a forced march, covering 35 kilometers on the first day. But then you noticed Russian KV-2 tanks attacking your forces. Your infantry units were powerless against them. Weapons like the assault rifle, machine gun and mortar, with which the Wehrmacht's land forces were equipped, were utterly ineffective against these tanks. Your company suffered its first significant losses since the beginning of World War II. Your commander had to call for reinforcements via radio. German tanks quickly arrived and removed the obstacle. The Wehrmacht advanced rapidly from the north, west and south. Many Russian prisoners were taken in the rear. Nevertheless, your enemy did not flee. Wherever a fight was possible, Red Army soldiers fought bravely and only retreated when threatened with encirclement. You looked around and suddenly realised that 6 out of 10 of your comrades lay buried in graves marked with birch crosses. The Wehrmacht had never suffered such heavy losses. By the end of September 1941, losses exceeded 500,000 dead. October began. The weather deteriorated, the advance slowed. While your company could previously cover 50 kilometres per day, you now struggled through mud, sometimes halting for days. Heavy motorised units bogged down in Russian clay, forcing soldiers like you to manually pull out tanks, trucks and vehicles. During the advance, there was no opportunity to bathe. Sanitation issues arose. Lice, bedbugs and dysentery became your constant companions for the rest of the war. Intense fighting continued. The prospects of acquiring land in Russia seemed less appealing. Locals, embittered by looting and occupation, offered no assistance. the most radical Soviet citizens retreated to the forests to join partisan groups, launching ambushes. You travelled unarmed on leave. Partisans executed German soldiers with extreme brutality, and the prospect of meeting them was among the greatest fears for Wehrmacht soldiers. The only thing more terrifying was a meeting between German infantry and a T-34 tank. Without mechanised support, it was hopeless. No weapon could stop this tank except an anti-tank gun. For a time, magnetic mines helped. To use them, you had to approach the tank from behind and throw the mine onto the engine compartment, where it would stick and explode. But the clever Russians quickly adapted, coating their tanks with cement. By 1944, you might have received Panzerfausts if you survived that long. These were excellent weapons, but of course Russian tank units quickly adapted as well, keeping their distance from infantry. They stopped at ranges of 100, 200 metres and fired from their cannons, ensuring no one could approach. During retreats after Stalingrad, the German army lost a vast number of anti-tank guns. Tanks targeted soldiers' trenches. When a soldier dug a trench, the resulting mound of earth could not always be camouflaged. These mounds were clearly visible to tank gunners, who would destroy the trenches one by one. This led to widespread despair among infantrymen. If you fought in the Wehrmacht until 1943, you would begin retreating back to Europe. The most intense battles and heaviest losses for the Wehrmacht occurred in the second half of 1944. During this year alone, the Wehrmacht lost approximately 1,100,000 men on the Eastern Front. If you weren't killed or declared missing, you were likely captured. According to NKVD data, 2,389,560 German soldiers and officers were taken prisoner by the Soviets. Of these, 356,678 died in Soviet POW camps, primarily due to severe illness and injuries. The first wave of prisoner releases occurred between 1946 and 1949. Initially, the sick and unfit for labour were released. War criminals were tried, while young and able-bodied prisoners were sent to rebuild destroyed cities. According to military historians, the treatment of German POWs was generally acceptable. Interestingly, to secure better conditions, captured Germans often claimed to be of other nationalities, identified as anti-fascists, studied Marxism-Leninism, and presented themselves as fervent communists. If you weren't classified as a war criminal, of which there were at least 500,000 in the Wehrmacht out of 18 million total soldiers, and didn't die in captivity, you would likely return to Germany by 1957. Upon your return, you would not have been eagerly awaited. It is unlikely you would have been pleased with your reception. Returning men found themselves out of place. During the war, German women had learned to manage on their own, earning a living, driving cars, holding high and responsible positions, and raising children. This was especially evident in West Germany. Divorce rates soared to 100,000 annually. Many veterans struggled to reintegrate and turned to alcohol or even suicide. West Germany faced unemployment, barely enough to survive. Paradoxically, East Germany, more devastated by the war, had no such problem, as labour was highly valued. Surviving soldiers were often avoided. People hesitated to discuss the war with them. Society desperately tried to forget the shame of Nazism and defeat. Silence enveloped those who survived and returned from the ignoble campaign. Together with other Wehrmacht veterans, you might have gathered once a year for a memorial day. Quietly, you would commemorate your fallen comrades. Yet throughout your remaining life,
thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. The new video is already on the channel.